Welcome to the Leader's Edge podcast. I'm Sandy Laycox, editor-in-chief of Leader's Edge. In this episode, I sat down with two giants in the field of organizational development, Farzad, founder of Critical Equity Consulting, and Warren Wright, founder and CEO of Second Wave Learning. We discussed the concepts of inclusion and psychological safety, humanocracy, and the new demands of leadership. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I am here with Warren and Farzad. Thank you guys. I'm so excited to have you here. We are going to jump right in. You all just gave a really long session to our legislative summit group on all kinds of ways to sort of change your organization and make it more human-centered. So we're going to get into some of those ideas and concepts. We'll just go right ahead with defining what is a human-centered culture, and then following that, why is it important right now for us to be focused on that?
So human-centered culture, I think, puts people first, right? So you're focused on the front end. Obviously, you have obligations to your clients, right? We're not saying to kind of diminish that, but as cultures shift over time, we've recognized that people want a more productive or positive experience in the workplace, right? For the longest time, I think people have felt alienated from their jobs. They felt kind of like almost harmed at times, to the point where it's damaging, but also reduces engagement and then eventually reduces productivity and these kinds of things. So I think human-centered literally just means putting people first, putting your employees first, putting your organization, the contributors to your organization first, and kind of philosophically changing your mindset to focus on that primarily.
I guess what I would add to that, you had asked why now. In March of 2020, a giant reset button was pressed, and people were not only reevaluating where they work, home or office, when they work, how they work, but also why am I working? I mean, why am I here? And of course, there's been, the Great Resignation and a lot of issues with the labor markets. And what's happening from a macro standpoint is employees are having a greater voice into the decisions that are being made in organizations, and leaders need to have a sense and awareness of what is going on and how people are feeling about that. The companies that are going to be excelling, we think, in the next 10 years are the ones that really focus on this human-centered culture, that really value the individuals as contributors to the outcomes and output of the organization through the people. So it's kind of like, and you're seeing union movements taking off. You're seeing a lot of employee power type of initiatives. And so I think there's kind of a perfect storm. So it's COVID, it's the economy, it's all of these things coming together, and it's all pointing in the direction of human-centered organizations.
So obviously there's a lot that probably goes into creating that in your organization. And you all went through a lot of the sort of tenets of that. One of the major things you talked about was psychological safety. Mm-hmm. So can you discuss what that is a little bit, and then what its effect is, both positive and negative, when you don't have it versus when you do on an organization?
Sure, yeah. So psychological safety is one of those concepts that kind of took off over the last few years. A few people have contributed to the literature, mainly Tim Clark and Amy Edmondson, but it really, I think, took hold after the Project Aristotle report by Google, which found they did a survey of 180 of their teams and found out that like psychological safety was the number one determinant of higher productivity, greater engagement, and high-performing teams, right? So what it is, according to Tim Clark, is he defines it as an environment of shared responsibility, shared vulnerability, right? And the idea is to create a environment where you're reducing the walls, you're able to kind of speak more freely, contribute effectively, have your opinions valued, have your input valued, and hopefully adopted, if it's a good idea. That's on one end. And on the other end, for you to be valued for who you are, your authentic self, your identity, right? So those are the two main sort of ideas of psychological safety. Who I am and what I contribute are very, very important sort of core elements of the concept. Without it, I think the exact opposite of a psychologically safe environment is a fear-based environment, right? So you're afraid to speak up, you're afraid to contribute. There may be times where an accident happens or is about to happen and you know the answer, but you've been so shot down over however many years that you're reluctant, you're almost insecure to say something, and that could change the outcome in the moment, right? So it's a lot of it's just autonomy, being able to kind of address the issues that need to be addressed in the moment. Without it, you have toxic environments, you have environments that promote microaggressions, biases, stereotypes proliferate, all these things that detract from these more open and honest environments. So it's a very, very key ingredient of not only just positive performance, but also your experience in the workplace as well.
You mentioned fear, and I want to ask about that a little bit more because you had some really interesting slides of philosophers that I know talking about fear and decision making. Can you talk about what happens when you have fear in decision making?
Yeah, so I mean, fear will stop you from contributing and being your authentic self, right? So when you're fearful, you go into a work environment. So if you're new to the environment, obviously for the first few weeks, it's always it's the honeymoon period. You feel good, everything's positive. Then you notice some things, and the practices are a little off. Some comments that are being made that are off, and then you get these nudges of you shouldn't be saying that. Like, you have a place here, and that's not for you to speak, right? And then it becomes an environment of fear, because if you do say something, there's going to be negative repercussions for that. Or if you do speak out on certain things, there's going to be negative, and that interrupts the flow of what Tim Clark calls intellectual friction, which is the positive tensions that exist where you're having interactions that result in very positive, synergistic, innovative ideas. So when you're in a fear-based environment, you feel insecure about who you are. All of the identity spaces that you occupy, from your race, gender, ethnicity, ability, status, right, et cetera. And that means also that you're fearful to contribute effectively and contribute well beyond the bare minimum. One of the great, in the book that we read, or that we talked about, Humanocracy, one of the quotes is that, as a person, you're a Swiss Army knife of all these different skills. But in a fear-based environment, you're only using the scissors, for example, right? Or you're only using the saw or something like that. So it's very limiting on the individual, and it prevents a lot of positive interactions environmentally, but also to the contributor, to the employee.
I was just going to mention there's an element beyond fear, and that is the notion of shame. And I don't know if you've all had a boss that always wanted to hear good news and never wanted to hear bad news, right? So you just could not show up in the office and say, this is what's wrong, because that wasn't. So it's not like it's because the culture is telling you that you're not being positive. Shame on you for not being positive.
Yeah.
And all you want to do is point something out that needs to be fixed. And you have an idea how to do that. But leadership is telling you that you're not positive. And so I think it shows up in different ways. It's not always just complete fear. It's that there's a prevailing culture that you don't fit into, and you are not being a team player. Mm-hmm. Because you're not going along with the sentiments of the possibly delusional CEO. That's where companies run into trouble.
Have you seen the show Succession at all?
Succession
exactly that.
is like the perfect show. And we should
I haven't seen
should
it.
show that in
It's
our
good.
class. Oh my God, it's so good.
Okay, I need to watch it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So sticking with leadership a little bit, you guys showed a really interesting graphic demonstrating what people wanted from their leaders pre-COVID and post-COVID. It was like a word cloud. And what I noticed about the post-COVID word cloud were the words that had gotten bigger. I wrote them down. So there was clarity, honesty, communication, certainty, truth. None of those words were nearly as big pre-COVID in the word cloud as they were. So to me, those are all words about needing to feel a certain way. Can you talk about that a little bit and what those words mean?
Well, the research was fascinating. We happened to be doing research with the World Bank, and so in February we went out and polled people. What was it? Tell me the words you associate with leadership that you want as a follower. What are you looking for in a leader? So in February of 2020, we asked the question, and transparency, clarity, some of the ones that you mentioned came up. We asked the question again 3 weeks later after the great crisis in March. I guess we're coming up on an anniversary now of COVID. Sad. And actually, the word that came out the largest was empathy. So empathy showed up, but it was like a real little word, before, it was spelled wrong too, by the way. So I don't know what happened, but people just, but after COVID, people were feeling really vulnerable, and they're feeling very unmoored, and they're feeling very much like, what do I do now? Where do I go? Is anyone going to listen to me? What I want from my leader is just someone who cares, someone who has empathy. I don't know if the business is going to be around. I don't know. Remember, go back to that time and how we felt at that time. We didn't know what was going on and what was going to happen. And so I think this notion of empathy really embodies and fits in very nicely to the model of human-centered organization, because in human-centered organizations, we're practicing empathy every day. This is kind of who we are and what we do and how we operate. And so that way, and the beautiful thing about that, and the thing I love, I worked for Gallup for 10 years, and we always said, George Gallup always said, if you want to know the will of the people, just ask them, right? So asking questions and getting answers from people is important. And so when you're asking people what's important to them, that's what they're telling you. It's not what leaders and academics are telling you, it's what the people are telling you is important. And empathy is one of those things that came up really, really highly.
So I have to tell you, when I was an undergraduate history major, as a history major, you had to learn how to read Gallup polls. Like that was the first thing that they took you to the library and they showed you where they all were. And they were like, this is how you do your research. This is how you learn about what happened in the past and what people thought about it. So I just agree with that.
I'm wonderful to hear that. Thank you for that.
That was when the internet was just starting, so there was still paper.
Right. Well, George Gallup started the company in the 30s, so we've been around a lot longer than that. But I think the fundamentals of that is you're opening your ears and you're listening to what people are saying, and that's what came out of this. Some more research that we did actually on what are the key things that people around the world want in a leader in difficult times and times of crisis. And there was 4 things that really emerged: compassion, stability, trust, and hope. And any context, any country, wherever you are in the world, those things come up the top 4. And it's just fascinating to me that there's all these academic models of what a leader should be. Well, why don't you actually go to the followers and ask them what they want and what they're interested and what resonates with them, so they could get on with their work and do their job on your behalf, right?
Okay, so let's talk about being a manager versus a leader. You guys had some interesting points. Talk about the distinction.
Yeah, well, there's a saying, a manager does things right and a leader does the right things. And what's really meant by that is that a manager is working on the details of a project. They're making sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. They're making sure that the team is assembled and everybody is aligned towards a mission. Leadership today is more of an embodiment of your authentic self and who you are. I know that sounds kind of wacky, and we could get into that. But when you actually talk to some of the top, quote, leaders, like Microsoft CEO, I'm drawing a blank.
Okay.
No.
No longer.
Oh,
Price? Tim Cook?
No, Tim Cook is Apple.
Is Apple. I'm confusing all the tech
it's actually Satya Nadella.
Yeah.
Satya Nadella has increased the market capitalization of Microsoft billions and billions of dollars. And he will tell you, and you ask him why, what he'll say is, we've moved from a know-it-all organization to a learn-it-all organization. We've learned to be humble. I don't know if you remember, but the CEO was not a humble guy. Steve Ballmer after Bill Gates, right? It was all about like, I got these ideas, we're going to plow it through. And I think with Satya Nadella, he's like, let's pause. Let's ask how people want to develop a product or serve the client. I don't know. I'm the CEO. How should I know? I have to rely on my front line to do that. And so in an environment that has psychological safety, it allows for that to happen. It's the facilitation thing that allows for that to happen.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is like the manager is like a very hard, firm, set, codified role, right? Like what we're seeing now is that when it comes to creating, if leadership is the role, they're creating opportunities for other people to step up and lead in certain things, right? So it's never this sort of rigid stratification of different roles that go up the chain. The future organization is much more distributed. Power is diffused. It can be culturally, or it can be actually structurally, as we go into self-management. But I think people want to step up. They want to take on projects. They want to use their expertise and experience in ways that has been quite limiting in organizations of the past. And people enjoy kind of doing that. And it's better for the organization because it leads to more productive, innovative outcomes, right? So I think leadership is much more dynamic. It can be situational, right? You can take leadership in a particular position. I used to, work in local government, and there were times when the decision makers were the frontline staff. When a water main broke, for example, down power line, they knew what to do because they were directly interfacing with the problem, and because of their experience, they were able to kind of take some degree of authority, but also keep it open so that ideas are flowing. How do we address this kind of thing? So I think like as we progress, these social stratas are sort of breaking, and we're allowing people to just organically kind of enter these situations where they can use their expertise, knowledge, and ability to lead to define outcomes. So I think it's leadership. The concept of leadership itself is changing as well.
Okay, as an effective leader, you talked a lot about effective conversations, how to have effective conversations. So how do we have them?
Well, I guess I would say that just go in, if you're a leader or if you're a position of authority or power in a conversation, you're the one that should be talking probably 20% of the time, and the other person 80% of the time. And so it's good to kind of have that frame of reference. We like to say that your new role is a listener in chief as a leader. You're the chief listener. And so it's your job to figure out kind of what's on people's minds and what's going on. And of course, if it's not a psychologically safe environment, people aren't going to talk, right? So you have to kind of lay the groundwork for that. But I would say that, I'm a fan of listening. I think it's a great tool. It's probably the best tool that leaders have to move an organization forward. Want to add to that?
Yeah, and there's a few kind of strategies to kind of think about when you're going into conversations that may or may not be determined as difficult. it can lead from anything to talking with somebody about work performance to something more serious, something outside of work, right? We're having these conversations in the workplace because they affect we don't operate in a closed system, right? You're a part of society, your organization's a part of society, it's all connected, right? So, I mean, a few things to think about when you're going into these conversations is recognizing, one, for me, I think is fundamentally important, is recognizing the power you hold in the situation. Like, is it a leadership, direct report dynamic? Is it a lateral? Like, are you talking as a colleague? Second thing I think is super important is to come at the conversation in good faith, right? We're not, part of active listening is that you're actually deeply listening to the individual, not waiting to, queue up a response when they say something to negate it, right? That person's speaking to something real to them. They're going to put their soul into it. That must be respected. Other things like, be mindful of the kinds of things you say and the impacts that they elicit. So one of the things that I like to say is, assume good intent in the conversation, but own the impact of it, right? If you do say something unintentionally problematic, it's your responsibility to take, apologize or bring you hold the power in that situation, so it's your responsibility. So it actually, it really depends on the type of conversation. It depends on what kind of trauma responses kind of come out when things are brought up. Conversations are those things that you can learn some strategies, right? And you can learn some how-tos, but unless you fundamentally shift your mind in how you're going about it, it's not gonna be effective. Like, you're not gonna use your own words. It's not gonna feel right. It's not gonna feel organic. But when you have this mindset of a positive experience, that we're trying to go at this to get something positive out of this, we're not butting heads, right? We want to break down walls and get to reality here. That leads to more positive outcomes. And I'm a big proponent of that kind of philosophical shift, as opposed to, I'm going to give you some surface level how-to things that, you may sound like a robot, but whatever, Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So one of the things that really stuck with me when you were talking about effective conversations was, you said you have to accept someone's truth in the moment. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So somebody's reality. So
can you explain it?
There's also philosophy.
I was going to say, it delves into cognitive, psychology, and even some hard science. So but fundamentally, there's nobody perceives reality objectively, right? The things that people experience, they experience through they can experience it through their past experience, but they can experience it through their parents, through their ancestors, right? So certain types of comments, for example, elicit traumas that are centuries old, right? One of the examples that I typically use is that, when you levy a microaggression around laziness, you can trace that directly to that comment being used for enslaved peoples 400 years ago, right? This comment has morphed over time and endured itself. It's about extracting as much human labor as possible, and putting that person in a situation where they feel harmed and that kind of thing. So so that means when somebody experiences something, their response is typically born out of something real. It's not just they're being this way or they're being that way. So it's their truth, right? And that needs to be respected. We don't know everything that led up to this person reacting in this way or this person saying this thing. So we should assume that when somebody says something that, hey, I've been harmed or somebody said something problematic or did something problematic in the workplace, we can't just our automatic response sometimes, especially if we're in a position of power, is like, oh yeah, they didn't mean that, or that's not real, or that kind of thing. But it's true to them. They experienced it, right? People just don't react to react for the sake of reacting. People react because something has happened in the past that led to this point, right? So it's a truth. It's true to them, and that needs to be respected. And like I said, there is no you can't fact-based argue with somebody who has had a traumatic experience, right? You can't be like, oh, that didn't happen because X, Y, and Z, and somebody look at you like, you weren't there, you didn't experience this. You don't know my past. You don't know, where I've come from, what I've had to go through, why this is so deeply hurtful to me, that kind of thing. So recognize that when people have the bravery and courage to tell you that, hey, this is problematic, that it comes from a very real place and it's true to them.
Okay. You also talked about bias, which we've talked about a little bit. And then you talked about interrupting your bias. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how you do that.
Sure. So two ways that I pointed that out was to either challenge or reframe. So to back up a little bit, I think one of the things that I definitely wanted to highlight in the conversation was that we've all been through the bias training. We know that everybody has biases. Okay, that's like nothing novel. It's like saying everybody has a brain. We all recognize patterns. Good, right? So that's human cognition. Power is a very important missing ingredient to that conversation around bias. The more power you give an individual in the workplace, the more rigid these systems are, the bureaucratic, where ultimate decision making is at the top. It's fear-based, all these things. You're also giving a lot of power to that individual's biases as well. So that individual has a lot of responsibility to check their own biases. I gave some examples of how to do that, which I'll get to in a second. But what's much more beneficial is if there's a group using a collective mind to check one another's biases and recognizing, hey, that may be a problem, that may lead to this, we're missing this, who's benefiting, who's being left out of this conversation. With a team. That's why we're talking about psychological safety, so we can open it up, the conversations, have a free flow of information. But what if you're in that position where you're making a decision and you want to make sure that you make the least biased decision as humanly possible? There's two ways of doing it. Challenging, that I propose. Challenging, which is basically completely negating that information that's going to lead to that bias through new information, right? I look up the facts. This isn't true at all, right? Why would I make this decision in this way if the facts don't prove it that way? So the other way is before it gets to a bias, it's rooted in stereotypes. The other way is switching that on its head. So something that may be perceived negatively, you can view it as a positive, right? If somebody is very loud or comes off as what you would perceive as aggressive in the interview, are they really that way, or are your biases taking hold? If it was somebody else, would you view them as passionate? Would you view them as really interested in the job, right? So it takes your ability to kind of slow down, use there's two types of cognition, your fast brain and your slow brain. Your fast brain tends to is where the biases really take hold. Your slow brain is when you slow down and then kind of think it through. It's why am I thinking this way? Is it rooted in anything real? Is it rooted in any objective criteria? And so that's the challenging and reframing that we proposed.
Okay, so a lot of this has been around what leaders can do and how to create this kind of new organization. What if you are not a leader, you don't have a position of power, and you are a bystander to some sort of bad behavior in an organization? What can you do?
Yeah, bystander. Oh, good timing. That's pretty good.
So the question was about an individual behavior that you noticed in it. Yeah. So one of the things we talked about was methods of bystander intervention. If you witness something problematic being said or done, how do you be an effective ally? How do you show up for your colleagues? There's a lot of methodology behind this, but there's a few simple things. Like, you definitely want to make sure that it stops, right? That's how you create a culture of accountability. You can do that in the moment if you feel comfortable, if your threat perception is in a place where I can do this, right? Or you can do it after the moment, talk to that individual who's levied that problematic comment, and say, hey, that's not cool or whatever. So in the moment, there's you can the framework for the bystander intervention is the 4Ds: direct, deflect, delegate, and disarm. Disarming is basically, you intervening, you kind of show up and you ask for some clarification. Maybe they said something problematic that they didn't really intend to, and you ask a very neutral question, like, oh yeah, can you elaborate that? What do you mean by that? That kind of thing, but kind of on a softer level. Deflecting is basically changing the subject, something new, just to kind of interrupt it at that moment, so that person who's being harmed kind of takes a breath a minute, right? Deflecting, did I say deflect? Disarm is, disarm, deflect. Direct is when you directly confront that individual and tell that individual that, what you've said was highly problematic. This is the reasons why, right? And you can use a call-in approach as opposed to calling them out, like, bring the person into a conversation rather than going at it very aggressively, which may come back and harm you, actually. And then there's methodology after the moment, show up for your colleague, right? You stand up for them. You invite the person who levied the comment, the person responsible is what they call it. You go to the person responsible and say, hey, I heard you say this. That's not positive, conducive to positive. I mean, in your own words, I'm not obviously, but that's not cool. Let me tell you why. You call them into a conversation and then you ask for a change, right? I think, I would like it if I don't have to witness that, because as a bystander, as a witness too, you may be being harmed as well, right? So you have a stake into it, right? You're a stakeholder. So these are methodologies, but the idea is interrupt the behavior, interrupt the comment in the moment or after, it doesn't matter, but make sure that we're kind of creating an environment where we're holding each other accountable to, at minimum, stop harm from perpetuating, right? Obviously, you want to get into psychological safety, which is on the positive end, right? It's like creating more positive work environments, but psychological safety is really eroded when you have these negative behaviors like microaggressions that perpetuate in the workplace.
So you both have a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and I'm sure that we could sit here for a really long time and talk about it. But I would love, so this is probably gonna be really hard for you, but I would love to hear from each of you sort of, if there's one takeaway as a leader or someone in an organization who wants to promote a more human-centered culture. One thing to think about. Warren, let's start with you.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I would say that humility and being humble is the new, sincerity is the new sarcasm, they say, in entertainment, right? We've kind of gone from, David Letterman sarcasm to, the Ted Lasso sincerity, right? But I do think that it had been kind of an expectation in the 80s and the 90s that leaders were tough. They were hard scrabble. They sometimes say, Jack Welch, we got to fire people to get stuff done, and it was just, and that was what leadership was, right? There was this very kind of machismo and paternalistic, you name it, right? It was all these things. And I think we've seen and expect a lot of us through enculturation and indoctrination and media that that's what leadership is. Whereas what the research shows and what literature shows, and Aristotle talked about a very long time ago, was that wisdom comes from knowing what you don't know and asking questions. And good leaders are have humility, they're humble, and they're curious. And so I would say those are kind of the core elements of what makes a great leader today.
Yeah, I think mine's very similar. I guess the only thing I'll say is that, and this is something that I readily talk about, that I make sure that it's one of the first things I always talk about, is the recognition of the power you hold in every space you're in, right? Whether that power is unearned, societally, bestowed upon you, or it's the power of your role, or it's the power of your charisma. It's the power of your ability to speak. Like, are you hogging up the room? That kind of thing. So always in any situation, kind of assess the power that you hold, and are you drawing it in, concentrating it within yourself, or are you empowering it, or even diffusing that power? Right? That's what great leadership is. Great leadership is not hoarding power. Great leadership is creating environments where you're taking on the role of the person that's going to carve out a room for safety and positive dialogue and good, conversations that lead to positive outcomes and innovation, that kind of thing. So power is important. I think it doesn't get as much importance in these discussions. And not only just interrogating your power, but structurally interrogating how power is distributed throughout your organization. Are you allowing for people to, step up and be real leaders in the situations that they know about, right? So, it's all about power relations for me.
Well, this has been really insightful, and I personally have learned a lot, so I appreciate it. And I love chatting with you, so thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Andy.
That was Farzad and Wright. Thanks for listening. For more Leaders Edge podcasts, go to leadersedge.com.